What was Robb Stark's master plan to win the War of the Five Kings? And when it all went horribly wrong, what was his plan to win back the North? Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to In Deep Geek. On this channel we cover A Song of Ice and Fire in full, along with the wider world of George R.R. Martin's World of Ice and Fire, books and TV shows, and also other great fantasy worlds like The Lord of the Rings and The Witcher. If that sounds good, there's a subscribe button in the bottom right of your screen. It's probably fair to say that when Robb started heading south with the Army of the North in response to news of his father's imprisonment, he didn't have a full plan about exactly what he would do. It was just that the insult was so great to Northern and House Stark honour that it required a response. It's only when his army gathers as a whole at Moat Cailin that he has his war council and decides on step one of his plan. This is War Council 1 of 3, and each will prove critical in shaping his overall plan. Because each time he has to have a War Council like that, it's because the situation has changed dramatically, and his plans therefore have to change dramatically too. The first War Council is about showing intent, supporting key allies, and gaining a strong position south of the Neck. There is still hope here that perhaps a negotiated settlement may be possible. Ned is not yet dead. Renly hasn't declared, no one knows what's going on with Stannis, and Dorne, the Reach, the Iron Islands and the Vale all seem to be staying neutral. In truth, the plan was a joint effort between Robb and his mother Cat, and at the forefront of their minds is the safety of Ned and Sansa, both captives of the Lannisters. This is Cat setting out the situation to her son. You have no choice. If you go to King's Landing and swear fealty, you will never be allowed to leave. If you turn your tail and retreat to Winterfell, your lords will lose all respect for you. Some may even go over to the Lannisters. Then the Queen, with that much less to fear, can do as she likes with her prisoners. Our best hope, our only true hope, is that you can defeat the foe in the field. If you should chance to take Lord Tywin or the Kingslayer captive, why then a trade might very well be possible, but that is not the heart of it. So long as you have power enough that they must fear you, Ned and your sister should be safe. Cersei is wise enough to know that she may need them to make her peace, should the fighting go against her. So head south, engage the enemy, try to win a few battles, and hope they might capture an important prisoner. At this point, Robb had a force of about 18,000. He left a few behind in Moat Cailin, guarding the only overland route into the north, then divided the rest into two. The bulk of his infantry were to head south down the King's Road, led by Roose Bolton, drawing out Tywin's army. The main aim there is to engage them and not lose, but crucially to distract attention away from the second, quicker force that would head down the western side of the river, to hopefully catch by surprise Jaime's force, which was besieging Riverrun. And wonderfully, the plan works almost perfectly. Roose suffered minimal losses against Tywin and managed an orderly retreat, while Robb's cavalry caught Jaime by surprise, relieving Riverrun, scattering the Lannister army and capturing Jaime himself. Having consolidated that position, Robb then had his second Council of War. They are now in a much stronger position, so can carry on with some of the original plan. Sir Cleos Frey is dispatched to King's Landing to negotiate a prisoner exchange so both families can get their loved ones back. But events have moved swiftly, and the situation is now a lot more complicated than it was. Tywin has camped his army at Harrenhal, blocking the way to King's Landing by either part of Robb's army. His lieutenants, like the Mountain and Amory Lorch, are ravaging the Riverlands, destroying farms, homesteads and small fortifications wherever they go, and a new Lannister army is being massed in the Westerlands. Meanwhile, Renly has declared himself king and allied himself with the Tyrells, the largest army in Westeros, and Robb himself has been crowned King of the North and the Riverlands. This last point isn't just a cosmetic one. It means that he is now, as he would see it, personally responsible for the well-being and safety of the small folk in the Riverlands, as well as the North, and as the ruler of an independent nation, is no longer in the game of potentially bending the knee to the Lannisters in exchange for concessions. Most importantly of all, perhaps, Ned Stark, Robb's father, is dead. And accommodation with the Lannisters in any shape is now almost impossible, so Robb attempts diplomacy in other ways. He dispatches his mother Cat to treat with Renly and his childhood friend Theon to get an alliance with the Iron Islands and his father Balon Greyjoy. Both at the time probably seemed reasonable ideas, to him at least. He also allows the various lords of the Riverlands to return back to their own lands and castles. This weakened Robb's main force, but gave the River Lords a fighting chance against the Lannister pillagers. Besides, as their new king, Robb did have an obligation to protect his people, rather than just abandon them to the Lannister bully boys. As for the remainder of his force, Roose Bolton was instructed to hold back for a while, whereas Robb continued the tactic he used so successfully in Phase 1 of his plan, taking a smaller force of fast-moving cavalry to catch the enemy by surprise. But this time, it wasn't just to win a few battles to try to force the Lannisters to the negotiating table, it was with a definite purpose, to tempt Tywin to abandon his position in Harrenhal, taking his army west to defend his homeland. Why did Robb want that? Well, being stationed at Harrenhal meant that Tywin could relatively quickly counter any threat that might come at the Lannisters. It blocked Roose Bolton from marching south again, and was close enough to King's Landing to react to an attack from either Stannis or Renly. If Tywin felt that he had to head west, it opened up the way for someone to attack King's Landing unopposed. Perhaps Roose with the main northern force, or more likely one of the Baratheons, and if they won power, then the Lannisters would be out of power, and, the thinking went, the Baratheons would be easier to treat with than the Lannisters. This is how the Blackfish describes the plan afterwards to Edmure Tully. "We were all horsed," Sir Brynden said. "The Lannister host was mainly foot. We planned to run Lord Tywin a merry chase up and down the coast, then slip behind him to take up a strong defensive position athwart the Gold Road, at a place my scouts had found where the ground would have been greatly in our favour. If he had come at us there, he would have paid a grievous price. But if he did not attack, he would have been trapped in the west, 1,000 leagues from where they needed to be. All the while, we would have lived off his land instead of him living off ours." "Lord Stannis was about to fall upon King's Landing," Robb said. "He might have rid us of Joffrey, the Queen, and the Imp in one red stroke. Then we might have been able to make a peace." Again, it seems a reasonably sensible plan, and started off pretty well. Robb won battle after battle in the Westerlands, even defeating that new Lannister army being amassed outside Casterly Rock, and taking control of some gold mines. But then, of course, everything went wrong for Robb. Perhaps it's worth another video sometime, but I don't think we can lay all of the blame for this at Robb's door. No one expected the prisoner swap idea with the Lannisters to work, but he had to do it anyway. Cat may not have made much headway in her negotiations with Renly, but no one could have expected him to be killed by that shadow baby. And even if too little thought was given to defending the North against possible raids from the Iron Islanders, and even if Theon always was a bit of an arse, I don't think Robb can be blamed for not expecting Theon to attack Winterfell. Not even the other Greyjoys expected that. Tywin clearly won the battle of diplomacy, getting the Tyrells on side and forging a secret alliance with the Boltons and the Freys, but that's Tywin being Tywin, not Robb messing up. How he did mess up, in terms of tactics as opposed to personal feelings, was reneging on his agreement to marry a Frey, and instead marrying Jane Westerling, choosing love over duty, a common theme in this story. That angered the Freys and the Boltons. Roose Bolton had then just married a Frey to get the political advantage of marrying into the new royal family. Still, his plan to draw Tywin westwards nearly worked. Tywin did eventually take his army out of Harrenhal and seek to head back to protect the Westerlands. Tywin tried to take his army across the Red Fork River, but Edmure had brought an army to ambush his forces on the opposite bank. Edmure claimed the victory, and Tywin gave up on the idea, instead heading south to eventually relieve the defence of King's Landing against Stannis' attack. Now, there are a lot of confusions about this moment by the main characters. Robb and the Blackfish are furious with Edmure for preventing Tywin from crossing and therefore stopping their plan from working, telling him he had been ordered only to hold Riverrun, not engage the enemy. We didn't see that conversation, so can't really comment on that, but it is clear that while they might have given Edmure that order, they didn't tell him their whole plans. So when Edmure took an opportunity to inflict a defeat on Tywin, he had no idea it would cause any trouble. And it's also clear that the Blackfish's assertion that Edmure held up Tywin for just long enough for him to receive news of Renly's death and change his plans is a bit of a push. A fast-moving messenger on a horse would have caught up with Tywin's mostly infantry army soon enough anyway. Perhaps Robb and the Blackfish were just a bit frustrated and took it out on poor Edmure. In any event, it didn't really matter. Robb would have married Jane anyway. The Freys in his army would have abandoned him anyway, and the messengers that reached Tywin telling him to turn around would have reached him soon enough anyway. Robb's plan would never have worked, regardless of what Edmure did. Robb therefore returned to Riverrun to even more bad news. His mother had freed Jaime Lannister, their most powerful bargaining chip. The Karstarks in particular were furious. Jaime had killed their heir. It was bad enough that Robb hadn't killed Jaime on the spot, but now he was being sent back to his family. Robb felt that Rickard Karstark's repeated insubordinations on this were enough to warrant his execution, and the Karstarks were now just as angry with Robb as the Freys and the Boltons. So this is the background to Robb's third and final war council. This time, everything had to be reassessed. His forces in the south were hugely depleted. The prospect of defeating the Lannisters or even securing the release of Sansa through a prisoner exchange was now negligible. And even more importantly, the north itself had fallen. Deepwood Motte, Moat Cailin, Torrhen Square and Winterfell had all fallen to the Ironborn, and the reports from Winterfell were that Theon had killed Bran and Rickon. So there was nothing for it but for Robb to abandon his southern ambitions and turn his attention back to the north. Winter was coming. Perhaps he could now just retake his old homeland and lick his wounds in the north for a while. It seemed like that had to now be the height of his ambitions. But first, he had to mend his fractured coalition. He negotiates a new deal with Walder Frey. Edmure Tully is now to wed his daughter Roslyn Frey, and Robb must present himself at the Twins to offer a full apology in person. It would be awkward and uncomfortable, and no doubt he would need to make other concessions, but it was a start. Then he needed to secure the succession. With his father dead, both his brothers believed dead, Sansa married to a Lannister, and Arya missing, presumed dead, he was the only Stark left, unless and until he had any children. I'll do another video on this because I think it will become really quite important who he chose and named in his will, witnessed by half a dozen of his closest bannermen. That done, it was time to retake the north. In his mind, once he had reinforced his army at the Twins with the Freys and the Boltons, he would have around 12,000 soldiers. And he probably thought that he could rely on the people of the north, too. They would all surely prefer to be ruled by the Starks than the Ironborn. And something else was in his favour. With the death of Balon Greyjoy, the Ironborn commitment to holding their northern acquisitions would, temporarily at least, be drastically reduced. Robb took great cheer from this. The other Greyjoys, Victarion, Asher, perhaps even Theon, would return to the Iron Islands along with their captains for a Kingsmoot to decide on a new king. Some of them would want to stand themselves, while all would want their loyal captains with them to vote in the way they wanted. It was actually quite democratic by Westerosi standards. Each captain had one vote. The person with the most votes became king, so the captains would be heading home, together with enough crew to take them back, leaving just a few Ironborn left to defend their new castles, and no commanders. We're not told Robb's cunning plan to take the more northerly castles, but we do know how he was going to attack Moat Cailin. His plan there was to send his entire force up the causeways from the south, but in 3 parts. Meanwhile, he sent Mage Mormont and Galbert Glover into the Neck to find the Crannogmen. When the Ironborn had seen Robb's entire force heading up from the south, they would expect the attack from there, and possibly the west, and Greatjon Umber would indeed lead a furious assault from the south. But secretly, the Crannogmen would show the central part of Robb's army the secret ways through the bog so that he could attack from the north as well when they weren't expecting it. Here Robb describes the plan. Tell Howland Reed that he is to send guides to me 2 days after I have started up the causeway. To the centre battle, where my own standard flies. 3 hosts will leave the Twins, but only 2 will reach Moat Cailin. Mine own battle will melt away into the Neck to re-emerge on the Fever. If we move swiftly once my uncle's wed, we can all be in position by year's end. We will fall upon the moat from 3 sides on the first day of the new century. Again, this seems like a reasonably sensible plan, given the circumstances. Moat Cailin isn't very defendable from an attack from the north, but tragically, it would never see the light of day. Like his father, Robb was outmanoeuvred by the Lannisters. Like his father, he trusted people who betrayed him, and like his father, he put love or personal honour before duty, and the Red Wedding would be his reward for that. Looking back, Robb's plans had mostly been sensible and occasionally daring, and most of the things within his control, particularly individual battles, he won. But of course, overall, he failed. Tywin beat him in a battle of diplomacy, events beyond his control went against him, and his own decisions backfired. Still, I do wonder whether there is a twist here. Robb antagonised many people while king, but also gained some great and loyal allies, who, it seems, are plotting even now for a Stark restoration. Robb's will perhaps bring Jon back into play for Team Stark. Perhaps Theon will redeem himself. Perhaps his mother will get her revenge from beyond the grave. The Starks are far from finished. If you'd like to see more videos in this series about the North in the Winds of Winter and beyond, please click on the link to the playlist on the left of your screen. Or to support this channel, the best way to do that is by clicking the link to Patreon on the right of your screen. That's all for this time. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again soon.